Good morning. Again, as Roseanne said, my name is Deb Binion. This is my husband, Will. We are the co-founders of the Jordan Binion Project, which is a nonprofit organization that we set up exclusively for the purpose of educating high school students about mental illness. We are very pleased to be here today, and we're really honored that you're interested in learning more about our program. We believe that it is extremely important to educate young adults about mental illness, and there are two main reasons for that. One, we hope to remove the stigma that is currently associated with mental illness, and we know that the best way to do that is to educate young people, because they are going to be the ones that are influencing our future society's attitudes and perceptions. And currently, stigma is thought to be the largest barrier to individuals seeking treatment for a mental health issue. So we absolutely want to do away with stigma. We want people to feel comfortable getting the help that they need. We also want young people to be able to recognize the early warning signs of developing a mental illness. So should they or someone that they know or care about begin to show symptoms, that they can seek appropriate help. I do this on a volunteer basis. I work full-time for McGavick Graves Law Firm here in Tacoma, and I am just extremely blessed that they agree with me on the importance of educating youth about this subject matter and allow me to take time off from work so that I can go out to schools and talk to students.
Good morning. Again, my name is Willie Binion, and I also do the Jordan Binion Project on a volunteer basis. When I'm not spending time in the classrooms, I'm working out of one of my 3 exam rooms. I'm a family practice physician assistant. For the last 10 years, I've worked for the Army Department of Defense. For 6.5 of those years, I was fortunate enough to be a healthcare provider for the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. So to those of you who may not be familiar with that regiment, that's the regiment that is shown in the movie Black Hawk Down. It's also the regiment that flew SEAL Team 6 into Pakistan to eliminate Osama bin Laden. So I can truly say on a day-to-day basis, I had the opportunity to work with heroes. I like to share with the students that even heroes are not immune to mental illness. But when they recognize the signs and symptoms and seek the appropriate care in order to manage their medical condition, and then once again displaying that level of courage that actually makes them heroes. And again, I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you.
We also do this because it's a subject matter that is very near and dear to our hearts. Our youngest son, Jordan, in his junior year of high school, began to show symptoms of developing depression. He started to isolate himself from both family and friends. He stopped participating in a lot of the activities that he normally thoroughly enjoyed. For instance, Jordan was an avid snowboarder, and we could pretty much count on Jordan by October of every year to come to us and ask us to purchase him the season's pass to either Snoqualmie or Crystal Mountain. Well, this particular year, Jordan did not approach us, and when we asked him about it, he just seemed disinterested, which was really unusual for Jordan. He also just kind of had an overall sense of sadness about him. He seemed down a lot, and he lacked a lot of energy and motivation. Well, his dad and I recognized that that was not our usual Jordan, so we encouraged him to go in and see his family practice doctor to find out what was going on. And he did. He was diagnosed with depression and started on an antidepressant. Well, probably pretty quickly, within 3 to 4 weeks, we could tell a pretty dramatic change in Jordan's overall demeanor. Started hanging out with his friends again. His dad went up and went snowboarding. We could just tell he was feeling a lot better. However, as several months went by, we started to recognize some other symptoms of mental illness that are not necessarily associated with depression. And although we never received an official diagnosis, after a lot of research on the subject, we believe that Jordan was either developing schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Very, very tragically, in October of 2010, just 6 days after Jordan's 17th birthday, Jordan took his own life. Statistics show that 90% of individuals who either attempt suicide or actually complete suicide have some form of diagnosable, but most importantly, treatable mental illness. Mental illness is the second leading cause of disability in this country, yet there is a deafening silence about it in our educational system. Many high school students graduate from high school without ever having had one lesson on mental health. Most don't know the early warning signs of developing a mental illness. Most don't know that mental illnesses are treatable, that there is hope for recovery, and that they can go on to lead a successful and productive life despite a diagnosis of mental illness. And that is the reason that Will and I started the Jordan Binion Project, is because we do not want to see what happened to our son happen to anybody else or any other family, and especially because of a lack of education, but most importantly, a lack of hope. We believe that the Jordan Binion Project is not only a mental health education program, we are a program that spreads a message of hope, and in turn, we believe that it is a suicide prevention program. So we're just going to really briefly, since we don't have a lot of time today, we're going to kind of walk you through what we do in the classroom. Most classroom settings, the classes are geared to 55 minutes, so we really have to get a lot of information in a short period of time. What we generally do is we start off by asking students true or false questions, and the reason we do that is we want to dispel some of the misconceptions and myths that are commonly held about mental illness. One of the first questions we ask, we do this also, so we like to get input from the students, we like to engage them. We ask them, mental illnesses are caused by bad parenting or family dysfunction. This is false. We tell the students that just because maybe you have a parent that's an alcoholic or a family member that is in and out of jail, that is not going to cause you to have a mental illness. However, we let them know that those are huge stressors in your life and that possibly they will need to seek some kind of support for those issues.
Mental illness is caused by chemical and neurobiological imbalance in the brain. This is true, and a lot of kids get this one correct. And what I like to emphasize with the kids at this point is that there's also a genetic predisposition to mental illness. So if there's a family member that has a mental illness, then your odds are slightly increased that you might go on to develop a mental illness as well. However, that does not mean that you will. On the flip side of that, is that if you do not have a family history of mental illness, that doesn't mean that you will not develop a mental illness as well.
Okay, so this obviously is true. A lot of kids don't get this. They don't believe that mental illnesses are medical illnesses. We really, really push this with the kids because we want them to know that there is nothing to be ashamed of because you have a mental illness. It is a medical illness. It is no different than having diabetes or heart disease. The only difference being is that your brain is impacted. And there isn't any shame. Most people feel ashamed that they have cancer or diabetes. Why is that? Because they realize it's a medical condition. So we let them know, so is a mental illness.
People who are poor don't like to develop mental illness. Like any other medical condition, we stress that mental illness do not discriminate based on socioeconomic standards. However, I also like to point out that often people that are poor do not have access to seek the appropriate care in order to manage their mental illness.
Okay, people who have mental illness usually have a lower IQ. Again, we explain to the kids that mental illness does not discriminate. There are people of all different intelligence levels that have mental illness. In fact, oftentimes there are people with mental illness that are highly intelligent.
This is a very important point here because the students that we see are basically within this age group, and this is true, by the way. And one of the reasons this is true is because their brain is not fully developed yet. Those neural pathways have not been laid down completely. There's a lot of influences that make them more susceptible to developing a mental illness. That's why often their first signs and symptoms usually show up usually the first or second year of college.
Okay, this one, most people or kids really have a hard time with this one. They believe that people with mental illness are more susceptible to be violent. It is in fact false. People with mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence than actual perpetrators. We go on and talk about why do we have this perception, and a lot of it's because of the media. And we know generally the media does not show us positive stories about things that are happening in our world. Usually it's something very negative and very sensational. They don't show us stories, unfortunately, about people that are living in our communities that have mental illness that are doing quite well and doing good things.
Mental illness is treatable with medication therapy. We stress the importance of seeking, the appropriate care. Some people, based on your diagnosis, will do well with medication alone. Some people will do well with therapy alone. But studies have shown that when you combine the two, that your outcome is going to be better.
This one, I didn't get this particular fact for a long time, but it is very much true. 1 in 4 families will be impacted by mental illness, and 1 in 17 adults will have a serious mental illness, such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Now, what we do to kind of illustrate this is we go around the classroom, we count off by 4, we have every 4 students stand up, and we show them in this small group, look how many people are standing up. Well, that's representative of the percentage of people in our communities that are impacted by mental illness.
Yeah, census in the United States, as of 2014, there was over 317 million people in the United States. 1 in 17 adults will have a serious mental illness. That's over 18 million people that's going to have serious mental illness. Not 1,800, not 18,000, 18 million people. And I can assure you that each one of them that received that diagnosis of a mental illness feel all alone. And that's simply because we're not talking about mental illness. And that's why we want to get the conversation started. Now, usually what I do, actually before we start to talk about different mental illness, I like to try to prepare the students, because some of the things that we say may be difficult for them to hear, because some of the signs and symptoms, either they're going to recognize them in perhaps in themselves, or in a family member, or perhaps in a loved one. So, but we try to stress the importance of creating a dialogue, because we strongly feel that by creating a dialogue, that is really the first step toward healing, and also developing compassion for those around them that may need healing. So that's why we feel strongly as well invested in our future generation, because our plan is to get the conversation started, but our hope is for them to keep the conversation going. So our first set of disorders are anxiety disorder. We start off with phobias. We just basically give them a definition and explain to them the difference between a phobia and having a fear. And basically, so simply that phobias will impact your life significantly, that will cause you to change your day-to-day activities. Then we talk about panic disorders. And what I have to stress with this particular disorder is just like the same main 4 symptoms that is experienced with the panic disorder, such as rapid heartbeat, chest pains, shortness of breath, increased sweating, are the same symptoms that someone would experience having a heart attack, which is another major condition. That's why often that initial diagnosis of panic disorder is made in the emergency room after they've gone there thinking that they was having a heart attack.
Then we talk a little bit about obsessive compulsive disorder. We explain to the kids what an obsession is, that it's a bad thought or image that continues to come into a person's mind that causes them a significant level of anxiety. We explain what a compulsion is, how it's a repeated act or mental thought that they do in order to relieve the anxiety that's brought on by the obsession. We explain the cycle of OCD. Obviously, we go into much more detail with all of these slides.
Here we discuss mood disorders. And the first one we talk about is major depressive disorder. And we explain to the kids that we all at some time feel a little down, feel a little depressed. But usually after about 2 or 3 days, we bounce back and start to feel all settled again. But with major depressive disorder, these symptoms will last a minimum of 2 weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. But we also tell them that there's definitely appropriate, again, treatment and management for this particular disorder, and there's some need for them to feel this way.
We talk about bipolar disorder. We explain that bipolar disorder is an extreme change in moods and emotions. We talk about the fact that they're teenagers and that having some sort of mood changes is perfectly normal, but what we're talking about here is extremes. We explain the symptoms of a manic phase, we explain symptoms of a depressive state.
Psychotic disorders, going to give a brief definition of psychosis, which is the active state of experiencing hallucinations and delusions, and Deb gives an example.
I talked about what the definition of a hallucination is, and that is a false physical sensation such as hearing voices, feeling things that are not there, seeing things or smelling things that are not there. Then we kind of define a delusion, which is a false belief that is not readily accepted by the general community.
Borderline personality disorder, we talk about the signs and symptoms associated with that, low self-esteem, impulse behavior, anger, and everything that encompasses this particular disorder as well. Then we talk about the diagnosis, and the first thing we do is that we encourage all the students that if they think they're having some problem, we encourage them to first go and see their primary care provider. Because the primary care provider knows their history, and they can assess quicker whether or not there's any changes in their behavior. And they can also refer them to appropriate counselors if further is needed. Unfortunately, we do not have lab tests or radiological studies that we can do to diagnose mental illness, but we do have screening tools that we can use. And we also stress the importance of, if they and their provider decide that perhaps a medication would be helpful, is to continue that follow-up and to continue that communication. Because one medication does not fit everyone, and often, especially with some of the antidepressants, it takes at least 3 to 4 weeks before you actually see the effectiveness of those medications.
We also talk to them about the fact that they should never try to self-diagnose. Sometimes they might see some symptoms on the slides that they recognize, but that there is other medical conditions that can mimic those, and also several different mental illnesses show the same types of symptoms. We really talk a lot about hope for recovery, because we want kids to know that their life is not over if they're diagnosed with a mental illness. And so we tell them about 70% they currently think of people with mental illness recover. We talk to them about what recovery means. Most mental illnesses are chronic illnesses, which mean that they will have them more than likely for the rest of their life. However, recovery means that they can stabilize those symptoms to where they're not troublesome for them.
And then before we end, we just ask, the students, what do you think of when you think of someone having a mental illness? Someone that is homeless, talking to themselves, disheveled, and so forth and so on. And would you take this time to share with them?
You show them some famous people that they recognize, celebrities, because kids, they're big into celebrities, and they oftentimes look up to them. So we show them Demi Lovato, who has bipolar disorder. Talk about Robert Downey Jr., who also has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Go over Brendan Marshall, who has borderline personality disorder, and I really admire the fact that he has said he wants to be the face of mental illness, and he has started a foundation for borderline personality disorder.
One of the best NFL wide receivers. David Beckham has OCD. Cameron Diaz also has OCD. Michael Phelps, who has ADHD. We don't talk a lot about ADHD. A lot of kids are somewhat familiar with that disorder. Beyonce has depression. She had to take a year off from her career in order to deal with her depression. Justin Timberlake. One thing I do like to point out to the kids that initially ADHD was thought to be a childhood illness, but then they realized that it does carry over into adulthood, and when it does go over into adulthood, it is usually accompanied by another mental disorder, such as depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Carrie Underwood has panic attacks. We talk to them about how obviously she's getting treatment for that, because she's able to go in front of large crowds of people and sing. So then we kind of end our program with showing them a picture of our son, Jordan. This picture was taken the summer before Jordan died, and he was pretty sick at this time. We talked to the kids about that a little bit. And then we point them to our email address. We tell them that they can email us at any time with any questions or concerns. However, we let them know that we're not mental health professionals, we cannot diagnose them, but we can answer generalized questions or point them in the right direction. Our website also has information for them about how to help a friend if they think a friend has mental illness. It has keys to recovery, and it also has some really good links to other mental health resources in the community. It also has resources for them to get help if they think they possibly have a mental illness. So I just close this out today. I just want to read a couple of the statements that we have received from students about the program so that you can see the impact that this program has. We have received hundreds of letters from students. It's really amazing when you get out into schools how much you realize those statistics of 1 in 4 are so true. There are so many kids out there that are dealing with mental illness. This young lady says, I was diagnosed with anxiety and major depressive disorder a couple of months back. After a year of having symptoms, I finally got the courage to tell my parents and seek the help I need. Once some of the people knew or found out because of the scars on my wrists, people treated me differently than they did before and stereotyped me. This presentation provides a lot of awesome information to people who don't know much about mental illness. And I think what you guys are doing is great because mental disorders are so overlooked and put aside in our society. And people are embarrassed about letting others know how they're feeling. Others do not know facts or how to deal with it. And I like the fact that you all push the fact that mental illness is the same as any other health problem or disease. Often people do not realize this. Your guys' presentation is a great way to raise awareness and teach teens about mental disorders. Thank you for this. Rest in peace, Jordan. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Binion, thank you so much for taking your time to come to our school to teach us important information about mental illness. This information is not something everybody knows. However, if there were more groups like you to inform students, this misconception of mental illness would vanish. It would make our society a much better place and helping people with mental illness much easier if this information was widespread. I truly appreciate your time and wish you the best of luck with the Jordan Binion Project. Thank you so much for everything you are doing to educate youth on these problems. I am personally affected by mental illness, and it means a lot that someone is standing up for people with mental illness. You both are very brave for standing up and sharing your experiences. Thank you again. Your presentation will save lives. I am bipolar with depression and anxiety. This presentation made me understand my mental illness better, and it also made me feel better about myself. I am taking an antidepressant and attending therapy. Both of these things have truly helped me. Last but not least, dear Mr. and Mrs. Binion, I thank you for showing me how I can handle my depression and problems in life. I talked with my parents about the project that you both are doing, and they feel really glad about this and can't wait until this goes worldwide. Neither can we. Also, what I learned is that you are helping us and our families so they don't go through what you went through. And it means a lot to me because I am a family person, and it would deeply hurt me if one of my family members died. I know you feel really bad about your loss, but it's not your fault. And I'm sorry about my bad handwriting, but I say this from the bottom of my heart, and I will always remember Jordan Binion. So as you can see, this program really does impact kids, and it really helps them. And we feel very, very passionate about it. And we can't help but feel perhaps had our son received some of this education, had somebody come into the school and given him a sense of hope, that maybe things would have turned out differently. Thank you.